Everything depended on my ability to paint for the jury a true picture of what happened the night the Franklins were murdered. 5 years of work had all come down to this.
My fellow gentlemen of the jury, let's review the most compelling testimony one more time. Mr. Barnwell, why don't you start?
Well, that box of knives was an unexpected twist.
Mr. O'Neill, you grew up in and around these parts, is that correct?
That's right.
And having grown up around here, you can easily spot a persimmons tree from all the others. That right?
Sure can.
I am holding in my hand the knife believed to be the accessory to the murder weapon. Have you examined it?
I have.
Tell me what you found.
The blade of that knife shows a stain of a persimmon.
And the club that killed the Franklins was cut from a persimmon tree, correct?
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, could this knife have been used to cut...
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may continue, Solicitor.
As I was saying, do you believe this knife could have been the one used to cut the branch that became the murder weapon?
Yes.
Gentlemen of the jury, this knife was found in the pocket of Jeff David. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Benet, you may cross-examine.
Mr. O'Neill, you testified that you could identify the stain from a persimmons, correct?
Yes, sir.
If it would please the court, I'd like to test the witness's knowledge. Mr. O'Neill, contained in this box are 12 knives. Only one has a stain from a persimmons. The others are from different trees, so you should have no trouble telling the persimmon stain from the others. Each knife has a marking on the back of the handle, so we'll know if your answer is correct.
Objection. This is highly unusual, Your Honor.
Your Honor, this is the only way to determine if the testimony from this witness is reliable.
Overruled, Solicitor. You have my curiosity, Counselor. You may proceed.
Tell the jury which of the knives in this box contains a persimmon stain. How about this one? Do you see a stain on the blade?
I do, sir. A slight one.
Is it from a persimmon?
No, sir.
If it'll please the court, this knife, the one Mr. O'Neill has proclaimed could not be a stain from a persimmons, is, in fact, from a persimmon sapling. His testimony should be retracted as evidence.
It does appear that Mr. O'Neill's testimony was not reliable, but I'm not certain that it was enough to create reasonable doubt.
What about all the footsteps around the Franklin's yard and in the hog pen?
Mr. Nichols, you went to the Franklin place the morning after the murder, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What'd you find there?
Well, we found footprints leading from the back door of the Franklin home to where they kept their hogs.
How many sets of prints?
We found 2 sets. One large one smaller. Now, it looked to me like they slipped into the pen while they was trying to escape. It was nighttime, you know. They should have used their candles.
Candles?
Yes, there were 2 expensive candle holders right at the back door of the house.
Maybe they were the Franklins.
Well, the Franklins wouldn't have spent money on things like that. I reckon it was from whoever broke in. They needed to see in the dark.
After you discovered the footprints in the hog pen, what'd you do next?
I followed them across the field to the edge of the woods. They must have had a horse tied there because there were hoof prints going off in one direction and footprints going off in the other.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Solicitor, you may cross-examine.
Mr. Nichols, how long have you known Mr. Benet?
A long time.
Do you consider him a friend?
I do.
And as his friend, you'd help him in any way you could.
If you're trying to say that I would...
Answer the question.
I wouldn't lie for him.
But you would help him if you could.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. I have no further questions.
Counselor, you may call your next witness.
I'd like to call to the witness stand Captain Frank Fuller. Captain Fuller, you went to the Franklin home the morning after the murders, did you not?
I did.
Was it at my request?
Yes.
Would you consider me a close personal friend?
I would.
Would you lie to this court in order to help my case?
We may be friends, but I would not lie to protect you. My faith won't allow it.
After the murders, you and I went to the woods near the Franklin's home, did we not?
That's correct.
And what was the purpose?
To find the sapling where the murder weapon had been cut.
Did we find it?
Sure did.
Describe to the court what we found.
We followed a path from the Franklin's place to where there was a persimmons tree with multiple blade cuts on one of its branches. Whoever cut the branch had some trouble cutting it off.
And why's that?
Because when you've only got one arm, you don't get proper leverage.
So the markings on the branch prove to you that the club used in the crime was cut by a man who only had one arm?
That's correct.
No further questions.
Solicitor Cawthorn, you may cross-examine.
Captain Fuller, please explain to the court how you could tell it was cut by a man with only one arm. This seems impossible to me.
Impossible to you, but easy for me. When you've only got one arm, like myself, you've got to place the branch on your shoulder for support and cut the limb with your good hand. Then you twist it to break it off. A man with two working arms would never do that.
As a one-armed veteran myself, I can relate to your description. You may continue, Solicitor Cawthorn.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Yeah. Time for closing arguments. Mr. Benet?
Gentlemen of the jury, I should like to paint for you a full and complete picture of what happened on the night of the murders. Before I do so, I'd like you to first imagine the relationship old Jeff David had to the Franklins. He was devoted to them. He worked for them, and they paid him. He knew where their money was and could have stolen it at any time, yet he never did. Now, let's examine the facts. You have a one-armed bandit and a desperate need for money. You own a shop in town that sells candles like the ones found at the murder site. The one-armed bandit decides to cut a sapling from a persimmons to use it as a weapon. Then, with an accomplice, he enters the Franklin home. Inside, the accomplice swings the club, striking both George and Drusilla. As the Franklins lie there dying, they ransack their cabin. But that's not the end. Drusilla awakens and startles them, and they strike her again. She falls back on her bed, and this causes them to run off in fright without searching her room. Remember, the trunk with all that cash? It was under her bed. In their haste, they leave behind the candles and plunge into the hog pen. They continue through the field to where their horse is waiting. They think they're safe, but they've forgotten a few things. The candles, the murder weapon, and most of all, the cash. And for doing the right thing, what happens to my client? Rather than being applauded for helping alert authorities to this ghastly crime, he is charged with their murders. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, you have heard all the testimony and have seen all the evidence. There's only one course of action before you. Jeff David must be cleared of this crime. Your Honor, members of the jury, to convict a man for a crime he did not commit would be a stain on the good reputation of this court. Gentlemen of the jury, you know in your heart that Jeff David did not commit these murders, and you know for the sake of justice, he must go free. Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you, members of the jury.
Solicitor Cawthorn?
We all know that most murders are committed by those close to you. A one-armed man, two sets of footprints. I don't buy it for a moment. I know the men who have testified for the prosecution. Captain King, he's upstanding and honest. And Tom Arnold, I trust my bank account to him. They ain't the kind to put old Jeff in a noose and then hang him. That's a lovely work of fiction by our distinguished defense attorney. Time for justice for the Franklins. Time to convict.
Hello, Sheriff.
Hello, Mr. Benet. Do courts always get called this late at night?
If the jury's reached a verdict, then yes.
Mr. Benet, I just wanted to tell you that I sure is grateful for everything you've done for me and my family. Been sitting here in this jail for what seems like forever. Away from my wife, my children's. Kinda hard to sleep not knowing if somebody gonna come in the middle of the night and put a noose around your neck. I reckon you don't know how it feels to sit in that courtroom and you can't feel like a man. Having to listen to folk tell lies about you and you can't talk back, can't fight back, feeling right feeble. having all them white men stare at you with their mind made up, ready to see a nigga hang. Who gives a damn if he did it? White man say he did it, so the nigga gotta die. Us slaves say all white men the same. If he can't own you, he'll kill you. I used to think that till I met Miss Moss Franklin and you, Mr. Benet. If I had 1,000 tongues, I couldn't thank you enough for what you've done for me. I knows you put yourself and your family in a mighty bad spot. So even as this placed that noose round my neck and that hangman pulled that lever, you know I knows I's finally gonna be free. And I can go on to glory, knowing that somebody fought for me.
Gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor.
Mr. Clerk, will you publish said verdict?
State of South Carolina against Jeff David, indictment of murder. Verdict, not guilty. This is your verdict? So say you all.
Yes.
Order! Order! I said order. Now, to everyone in this courtroom, I want to state clearly and without hesitation that justice has been served. The verdict of not guilty is entered into record. Now, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but Jeff David, you are a free man.
I never thought I'd see this day.
Oh, Lord, he's sure gonna bless you for this, Mr. Benet. He's sure enough gonna bless you.
Congratulations, Benet. I can't believe you won, but I accept the verdict.
Thank you, solicitor. It was a hard-fought battle. I just hope the town does the same. Now, if you'll excuse me.
Congratulations, William. I don't think anyone else could have done it.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Old Jeff is certain to become your lifelong devoted friend.
I suppose he will.
But I gotta warn you, the town's guaranteed to have a strong lynching spirit once it learns of the verdict.
Sheriff, I'm confident you'll settle things down around here. But when it comes to the real killers, you might want to pay a visit to a certain one-armed Confederate soldier who happens to own a candle store in town. Expensive candles. Similar to the ones found outside the Franklin home. Also, he employed a Negro handyman, and they were always arguing over money. Word has it, they visited the Franklins a few days before the murder.
I guess you just can't leave this case alone, can you, Benet?
Let's just say, that'll be a story for another time.